The muffled laughter wasn't what truly broke me. It was the way his hand rested on her back, the casual intimacy of it, a gesture I thought was reserved only for me. My breath hitched, a silent scream trapped in my throat, as I watched David, my husband of 22 years, share a private moment with another woman, right there in the bustling coffee shop we always frequented. I was supposed to be picking up his dry cleaning, a mundane errand that somehow twisted into the most devastating moment of my life. I'm Sarah, 42, and until that precise second, I genuinely believed I had the perfect marriage, a life meticulously built on trust and shared dreams in our quiet suburban town. We had 2 wonderful children, a beautiful home, and a comfortable, predictable rhythm that felt like an unbreakable foundation. But what I didn't know, what truly shattered me, was that this wasn't the beginning of the end. It was merely the first cruel whisper of a truth so profound, so devastating, that it would eventually redefine everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and the human heart. My vision blurred for a moment, the vibrant colors of the coffee shop fading into a dull gray haze. It felt like watching a movie, a scene unfolding slowly, detached from my own reality. Then came the hand on her back, a tender, possessive touch that squeezed the air from my lungs. It was an unspoken declaration, a silent testament to a connection far deeper than mere friendship. My heart, which minutes ago had been beating with the comfortable rhythm of domesticity, now hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird trying to escape. My carefully constructed world didn't just crack, it imploded. The coffee shop's familiar sounds turned into a deafening roar in my ears. I felt a cold dread spread through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably, the keys I held digging into my palm. I stood there, frozen, a silent witness to my own demolition. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, a way to spin this into something innocent. A colleague? A client meeting? But the way she looked at him, the way he looked at her, it was undeniably intimate. It was a gaze that spoke of shared secrets, of whispered promises, of a life I wasn't a part of. The air felt thin, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, to rewind the last 5 minutes and never open that door. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the polished concrete floor, my eyes locked on the betrayal unfolding before me. After what felt like an eternity, David glanced up, his eyes scanning the room. His smile, still fixed from the conversation with her, faltered when he saw me. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. His jaw went slack, and the casual touch on the woman's back vanished as if burned. In that instant, his guilt was palpable, a foul stench filling the space between us. The woman, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, turned her head, her bright eyes meeting mine. For a split second, there was confusion, then a dawning realization, a flicker of something that looked like pity. No, it was something else. It was an acknowledgement, a recognition of the wife she had been usurping. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The entire narrative of my life, the love story I had meticulously crafted, lay shattered at my feet. My legs somehow found the strength to move. I turned on my heel, pushing through the heavy glass door, the familiar scent of coffee now tasting like ashes in my mouth. I walked, no, I fled, blindly, instinctively to my car. Each step was a wrenching pull away from the life I thought I had. The drive home was a blur. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the familiar streets, turning them into streaks of color. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. How could he? How could David, my David, do this to me? To us? The questions ricocheted around my skull, each one a fresh stab of pain. When I finally pulled into our driveway, the house, usually a sanctuary, felt cold and alien. I stumbled inside, collapsing onto the living room couch, the silence deafening after the internal screaming. He called, of course. His name flashed on my screen, a cruel reminder of the life he was destroying. I ignored it. Then he texted, a desperate flurry of apologies, explanations, pleas. "Sarah, please talk to me. It's not what it looks like. Let me explain. Lies. All lies." I deleted them without reading, my resolve hardening with each passing minute. The initial shock began to morph into a searing anger, a righteous indignation that demanded action. He didn't deserve my tears. He deserved my fury. When David finally walked through the door an hour later, his face was a mask of despair, guilt etched into every line. He looked like a man who had just lost everything. And he had. He started to speak, a torrent of desperate words, but I cut him off. My voice, usually soft, was steady, cold, and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "Don't," I said, rising to my feet. My posture was straight, my gaze unwavering. "Don't say another word. I saw you, David. I saw everything." He tried to grab my arm, to plead, to touch me, but I recoiled as if burned. "Sarah, please. It was a mistake. Just one time. I swear." The lie hung in the air, thick and repulsive. My eyes narrowed. A mistake that involved intimate laughter, tender touches, and the kind of gaze you used to reserve only for me? Do you honestly think I'm that stupid? My voice cracked slightly, but I forced it back into a calm, controlled tone. "There's nothing to explain. There's nothing to salvage." He pleaded, begged, promised to change. He swore he loved me, that she meant nothing. He painted a picture of a momentary lapse, a weakness. But his words were hollow, ringing false against the vivid memory of him with her. The trust, once absolute, had evaporated, leaving behind a chasm of cynicism and hurt. "I want a divorce, David," I stated, the words clear and precise, each syllable a nail in the coffin of our 22 years. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by my ragged breathing. His face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears, but they held no power over me now. His tears were for himself, for the life he was losing, not for the heart he had shattered. "I can't live with this. I won't. You betrayed me in the most fundamental way." The next few weeks were a blur of pain, paperwork, and sterile conversations with my lawyer, Clara. She was a no-nonsense woman, her calm professionalism a stark contrast to the emotional maelstrom raging inside me. She listened patiently as I recounted the details, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. "Adultery is a clear grounds for divorce, Sarah," she'd said, her voice firm. "We'll pursue an equitable division of assets. Do you have any shared businesses or significant investments?" Each question felt like a brutal incision, dissecting our shared life into quantifiable assets. Our home, our savings, the kids' college funds, everything became an item on a spreadsheet, devoid of the love and effort that had built it. David, through his own lawyer, initially fought it, trying to drag out the process, hoping I would falter, perhaps even forgive him. He sent me more texts, left voicemails, even showed up at the house uninvited, begging me to reconsider. "Think about the children, Sarah. Think about our life." But my resolve remained ironclad. The image of him with that woman was seared into my mind, an indelible tattoo of betrayal. I understood that forgiveness might eventually come for myself, for my own peace, but reconciliation was impossible. I deserved better. Our children deserved a mother who respected herself enough to walk away from a broken trust. This was not just about David anymore. It was about me reclaiming my worth. The legal proceedings moved slowly, deliberately, each step an agonizing reminder of the life I was dismantling. Clara assured me we had a strong case. "We have enough evidence to prove the marital misconduct, Sarah," she explained, referring to the pictures I'd managed to discreetly take on my phone that day, blurred but undeniable. It should ensure a fair settlement. I remember feeling a flicker of something akin to vindication at the thought. He wouldn't get away with it easily. Finally, the day arrived. The courtroom was a sterile, impersonal space, filled with the hushed whispers of other shattered lives. I sat beside Clara, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to control the tremor that ran through my body. David sat across the room with his own lawyer, his face pale, his eyes avoiding mine. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable sense of finality. The judge, an older woman with kind but weary eyes, called our case. She listened patiently as Clara presented our petition, outlining the timeline of our marriage, the discovery of the infidelity, and our request for divorce and fair asset division. David's lawyer offered a feeble counter-argument, attempting to minimize his client's actions, painting it as an isolated incident, a moment of weakness. It was infuriating, but I held my tongue, knowing Clara had everything under control. Then, the judge turned her attention to a large manila envelope resting on her desk. It had been submitted by David's lawyer as part of his defense, an unexpected piece of evidence that Clara had warned me about, but hadn't been able to preview. Mrs. Miller, the judge addressed me directly, her voice soft, but authoritative. Your husband's counsel has submitted some additional materials for the court's consideration. I must warn you, these photographs are highly sensitive and may be distressing. My heart pounded. Photographs? What photographs could David possibly have that would distress me? I had the pictures of him with her. What could he possibly present? A cold dread began to creep in, a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the judge carefully slid open the envelope. She paused for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly as she withdrew a stack of glossy prints. She looked at the first one, then at David, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. My breath hitched. And that's when I saw the first photograph. A blurry image passed across the courtroom to me. It wasn't of David with another woman, not directly. Instead, it was a grainy, almost unrecognizable picture of a child, and next to it, a document. My carefully constructed world didn't just crumble. It evaporated, replaced by a horrifying, gut-wrenching realization that the affair was merely a facade. The real secret, the true tragedy, was something far, far more agonizing. The air in the courtroom, already thick with the weight of my crumbling life, became impossibly heavy. My heart, still raw from David's casual betrayal, began to hammer against my ribs with a new, frantic rhythm. Mrs. Miller, the judge's voice cut through my internal panic. Your husband's counsel has submitted some additional materials for the court's consideration. I must warn you, these photographs are highly sensitive and may be distressing. My mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. What photographs? What could be more distressing than the image of my husband with another woman? I had presented the pictures of him with her. What twisted counter-narrative could he possibly construct? A cold dread, far deeper than anything I'd felt before, began to seep into my bones. I watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the judge carefully slid open the manila envelope. Her brow furrowed slightly as she withdrew a stack of glossy prints, not the blurry cell phone shots I'd taken, but professional-grade photographs. She looked at the first one, then at David, a flicker of something unreadable. Pity? Sorrow? In her eyes. My breath hitched. She passed the photo and a folded document to Clara, who, despite her usual stoicism, visibly stiffened. Clara's gaze met mine, a silent preparation for impact, before she slowly, deliberately, slid the images across the table to me. The first photograph was indeed of a child, a boy, no older than 5 or 6, with unruly dark hair and startlingly familiar blue eyes. He was laughing, caught mid-run in a sun-drenched field. He looked joyful, innocent, utterly unaware of the earthquake he was about to cause in my life. Next to the photo was a document, a yellowed, official-looking paper. My eyes, still trying to reconcile the laughing child with this sterile courtroom, fell to the text. It was a birth certificate. My vision blurred for a moment, the world tilting on its axis. I blinked, trying to focus, my hands trembling as I picked it up. The child's name was listed as Ethan Hayes, and then I saw the parents' names. My breath caught in my throat, a silent gasp that tore through my chest. The mother's name was not David's mistress. It was a name I recognized from my own past, a name that belonged to a family I thought I knew intimately. The father's name was David Miller. The date of birth on the certificate was 6 years ago. 6 years. We had been married for 16 years at that point. This wasn't a recent affair. This was a deeply embedded secret, a parallel life he had been living, or rather, a life he had been part of, for nearly a third of our marriage. The affair I'd witnessed in the coffee shop, the woman with the auburn hair. She wasn't the mother. She must have been something else entirely. A distraction? A cover? My carefully constructed world didn't just crumble. It evaporated, replaced by a horrifying, gut-wrenching realization that the affair was merely a facade. The real secret, the true tragedy, was something far, far more agonizing. I stared at the document, then back at the laughing boy, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. Those blue eyes. They were so much like David's, so much like mine. But how? Who was the mother? And why had David kept this child, this entire life, a secret for so long? The questions hammered at me, each one a fresh, brutal incision into the very core of my being. Clara, seeing the color drain from my face, leaned in. "Sarah? Are you all right?" she whispered, her voice laced with concern. I couldn't speak. I could only shake my head, a raw sound escaping my lips. My gaze drifted across the courtroom to David. He was watching me, his eyes now filled with a desperate, pleading agony. He wasn't just losing a wife. He was laying bare a secret that clearly threatened to destroy him too. "Your Honor," David's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, began, his voice surprisingly gentle for a legal shark. "This document and these photographs are presented not as a defense of marital misconduct, but as critical context. They reveal a truth that Mr. Miller has carried for years, a truth he has tried to protect, and one that deeply complicates the marital history presented by Mrs. Miller's counsel." Clara rose, her voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant to the dissolution of marriage based on adultery. Mr. Miller's actions are clear." "The court will allow it for context, Ms. Davies," the judge interjected, her gaze still on the photograph in my trembling hand. "This appears to be highly relevant to the equitable division of assets, and potentially to the future well-being of all parties involved." Mr. Henderson continued. 6 years ago, Mr. Miller was approached by his estranged sister, Amelia Miller. Amelia, David's older sister. I hadn't heard that name in over 20 years. She'd left home abruptly right after high school, cutting all ties with their family, a source of quiet shame and hushed whispers in the Miller household. David rarely spoke of her, only that she'd chosen a path away from them. "Amelia was gravely ill," Henderson stated, his voice somber. "She had a young son, Ethan, and no one else to turn to. She came to David, her only family, and begged him to raise her child, to provide a stable, loving home for her son before she passed. My world spun. Amelia, a child, and David? He had taken him in? 6 years ago? Mr. Miller, driven by a profound sense of familial duty and love, agreed, Henderson went on. However, Amelia made one condition: that Ethan's true parentage remain a secret. She feared the social stigma, the judgment from their traditional conservative family, and she wanted her son to have a normal life, unburdened by her past mistakes. She believed that if the truth came out, it would shame him, and perhaps even alienate him from the Miller family forever. She asked David to simply raise Ethan as his own, a secret known only to a very select few, until Ethan was old enough to understand. A choked sound escaped me. Raise him as his own? But I was his wife. We were his family. How could he have done such a thing without telling me? My mind flashed back to those subtle shifts, the late nights at the office, the fleeting sadness in his eyes. It wasn't work stress. It was the weight of a monumental secret. My capacity for empathy and understanding, qualities I once cherished, had not only been my blindfold, but had allowed him to weave an elaborate tapestry of lies around me for years. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, you'll understand the chilling sensation of realizing your entire past is a fabrication, a stage where you were merely an unwitting actor. Amelia passed away shortly after Ethan came into David's care, Henderson concluded, his voice dropping to a near whisper. David has been raising Ethan in a separate home, providing for him fully, visiting him daily, and ensuring he has a loving environment. He initially tried to integrate Ethan into his life with Sarah, but Amelia's dying wish, coupled with his fear of Sarah's reaction and the potential scandal, led him to believe he had to keep it a secret. He agonized over this decision, Mrs. Miller, every single day. A separate home. He was raising a child in a separate home. A child who was his nephew. But wait, a child he was trying to pass off as his son. The implication hung in the air. A sickening fog. He hadn't just kept a secret. He'd compartmentalized his life, creating an entirely separate reality. And the other woman from the coffee shop? Was she involved? Was she Ethan's caregiver? The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far more complex and devastating than I could have ever imagined. So, the woman in the coffee shop? I managed to rasp, my voice hoarse, finally finding it. Who was she? David flinched, his eyes darting to mine, brimming with tears. She's Ethan's nanny, Sarah, he choked out, his voice cracking. Her name is Olivia. She's been looking after him, helping me. She knows everything. Olivia, the woman whose back he'd touched with such casual intimacy. Not a mistress, but an accomplice in his secret life. A caregiver for his hidden child. The betrayal was no longer just about sex or fleeting affection. It was about the fundamental denial of our shared life, our future, our very identity as a family. It was about a child I never knew existed, a child he had been raising right under my nose. Clara, composed once more, stood up. Your Honor, while this information is certainly impactful, it does not negate the fact that Mr. Miller has maintained a secret family, a secret child, for 6 years, concealing it from his wife. This constitutes an egregious breach of trust and a clear marital misconduct, irrespective of the child's true relation to him. Furthermore, it introduces significant questions regarding marital assets and responsibilities. Indeed, Ms. Davies, the judge agreed, her gaze now stern on David. Mr. Miller, did you truly believe you could keep this secret indefinitely? From your wife? From your children? David finally spoke, his voice raw with despair. I didn't know how to tell her, Your Honor. I was terrified. Amelia made me promise. She was dying. I couldn't say no. I was trying to find the right time, a way to explain it to Sarah, to my kids, without destroying everything. I wanted to protect everyone. His eyes, red-rimmed and pleading, fixed on me. Sarah, please. This is why I've been so desperate to talk, to explain. It wasn't an affair in the way you think. It was a family secret. My family's secret. And now it's out. My heart ached, not for him, but for the life I thought we had. The years I had wasted trusting a man who could so masterfully deceive me. The golden couple facade had shattered into a million pieces. The truth was far worse than a simple affair. This was an entire shadow life, a parallel universe where David was a different man, a secret father, a keeper of monumental lies. But that wasn't the only secret. As Henderson continued to lay out David's case, explaining how the expenses for Ethan's care had been meticulously kept separate, how David had structured his finances to provide for him without my knowledge, a deeper, more chilling realization began to dawn on me. The mother on the birth certificate, Amelia Miller, David's estranged sister. The birth date, 6 years ago. That was around the time my own parents had seemed particularly stressed, hushed conversations, my mother often distant, spending weeks away, ostensibly caring for an ailing relative in another state. My mind raced back, trying to piece together fragmented memories, forgotten details. The relative my mother supposedly visited often. She was never named specifically, just a vague family emergency. My parents, always so private, had been unusually withdrawn around that time. I remembered asking them about Amelia years ago, and my mother had always just sighed, saying, "Some wounds just don't heal, Sarah." But what if it wasn't just a wound? What if it was a deliberate cover-up? A horrifying thought solidified in my mind, a suspicion so dark, so unbelievable, that it made my stomach lurch. Could my own parents have been involved in this secret? Could they have known about Amelia's child? Perhaps even helped orchestrate the secrecy surrounding Ethan's birth and subsequent hiding? The timeline was too neat, the secrecy too absolute. And where was Ethan living all this time? Clara demanded, cutting through my spiraling thoughts. Who was his guardian before he came into Mr. Miller's care 6 years ago? The birth certificate is 6 years old, but Mr. Miller stated his sister approached him when she was gravely ill, then passed away shortly after he took Ethan in. This timeline doesn't fully align. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a nervous flicker in his eyes. Ethan was in foster care for a brief period, Your Honor. Amelia had struggled for a long time. It wasn't an ideal situation, but she was trying to get on her feet. He paused, then looked directly at the judge, a subtle desperation in his voice. However, the circumstances of Ethan's earliest years are incredibly sensitive. We have a sealed record, a court order from another county, protecting the identity of the family who initially helped Amelia. They were a pillar of the community, trying to avoid scandal. A pillar of the community, avoiding scandal. My parents, my mother's distant trips, the way she'd always shut down any conversation about Amelia. The pieces weren't just clicking. They were slamming into place with brutal force. It couldn't be. It couldn't. My own parents, hiding a secret child, a nephew, for decades. And then somehow, David gets involved, continuing the deception. Your Honor, I finally managed to say, my voice trembling but firm. I need to see that sealed record. David's head snapped up, his face paling even further. Sarah, no, he pleaded, his voice a desperate whisper. You don't understand. It's not what you think. Please, just let it go. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Miller, it is merely the tip of a much larger, much older iceberg. I suspect there is a deeper, uglier truth at play here. A truth that could shatter not just your marriage, but your entire understanding of your family, and perhaps even yourself. My blood ran cold. The judge's words were a chilling prophecy. As I looked at the photograph of little Ethan, the boy with my husband's eyes, a horrifying new question formed in my mind, one that felt like a betrayal from a ghost. Why didn't David ever tell me that Amelia was pregnant? Because Amelia hadn't been David's sister. Not genetically, not at all. No, Amelia Miller. She was my mother's sister, my aunt. And if Ethan was Amelia's child, then those blue eyes weren't just like David's. They were like mine. And if my parents had hidden him, and David had continued the secret, then what did that make me? And what was the real relationship between Amelia and David? The implications were unfathomable, a bottomless pit of lies that threatened to swallow me whole. My understanding of my entire life, my family, my lineage, suddenly hung by a thread, ready to snap. The judge's words, "This divorce, Mrs. Miller, it is merely the tip of a much larger, much older iceberg," echoed in my ears, a chilling prophecy that gripped my heart with icy fingers. As I looked at the photograph of little Ethan, the boy with David's eyes, a horrifying new question formed in my mind, one that felt like a betrayal from a ghost. Why didn't David ever tell me that Amelia was pregnant? Because Amelia hadn't been David's sister. Not genetically. Not at all. No, Amelia Miller. She was my mother's sister, my aunt. And if Ethan was Amelia's child, then those blue eyes weren't just like David's. They were like mine. And if my parents had hidden him, and David had continued the secret, then what did that make me? And what was the real relationship between Amelia and David? The implications were unfathomable, a bottomless pit of lies that threatened to swallow me whole. My understanding of my entire life, my family, my lineage, suddenly hung by a thread, ready to snap. I stumbled out of the courtroom, Clara by my side, her hand a steadying presence on my arm. The sterile corridors seemed to warp and twist around me, the hushed voices of other people fading into an indistinct drone. My mind was a maelstrom of fragmented memories and agonizing questions. Amelia, my mother's younger sister, had been the black sheep of the family. A free spirit, rebellious and fiercely independent, she'd vanished from our lives shortly after high school, her name becoming a taboo subject. My mother would often sigh, her face clouding, whenever Amelia was inadvertently mentioned, saying only, "Some wounds just don't heal, Sarah." Now those words took on a terrifying new meaning. "Sarah," Clara's voice cut through the fog. "Are you going home? Do you need me to call someone?" "Home?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "What is home anymore, Clara? What is anything?" I shook my head. "No. I need to see David, before he files that affidavit. I need to hear it from him. Everything." Clara looked hesitant. "Are you sure that's wise?" "Emotionally, it might be too much right now." "I can't live another minute without knowing," I insisted, my voice hardening with a resolve born of desperation. "I need the truth, Clara. All of it." She nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll arrange for a supervised meeting at my office in an hour. This needs to be formal, Sarah, for your protection." The hour felt like an eternity. Each ticking second on the clock was a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of my past. When David walked into Clara's office, accompanied by his lawyer, the air crackled with a new kind of tension, far removed from the previous day's anger over infidelity. His face was drawn, his eyes hollowed with sleepless nights, but there was a flicker of genuine fear in them as he met my gaze. He knew. He knew what I suspected. "Sarah," he started, his voice barely a whisper. "I know this is... I wanted to tell you before this came out. You had 22 years, David. I cut him off, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. 6 years with Ethan. 6 years of watching you lie to my face every single day. Tell me, David. Tell me now. Who is Amelia Miller, really? He closed his eyes, a pained grimace twisting his features. She was your mother's sister, Sarah. Your aunt. Amelia Hayes, actually. She took your grandfather's surname, not your grandmother's maiden name, when she left. She tried to distance herself from the family. My breath hitched. Hayes. Ethan Hayes. So she wasn't your sister. She was mine. My aunt. And Ethan. Ethan is my cousin. The words tasted like ash. And you, David, you allowed everyone to think he was your son. Why? Why the elaborate lie? And what did my parents have to do with this? David swallowed hard, his gaze darting between me and the floor. Amelia. She got into trouble young. Very young. She fell in love with a man who was already married. He left her when she told him she was pregnant. She was barely 18. Your parents. They were pillars of the community, Sarah. They were terrified of the scandal, of what it would do to their reputation, to your grandmother's reputation, to your future. My mind flashed back to hushed conversations, my mother's ailments, her long absences. So, the ailing relative my mother visited? It was Amelia. She was hiding her pregnancy, wasn't she? David nodded miserably. Yes, your mother took Amelia away to a small private clinic in another state to have the baby in secret. She tried to persuade Amelia to give Ethan up for adoption. But Amelia, she couldn't. She loved him. She just couldn't keep him. Couldn't keep him, I repeated, my voice rising. So what happened? Was he put in foster care, as your lawyer claimed? Yes, David said, his voice thick with emotion. For a brief period. Your parents made Amelia promise to sever ties, to never bring that scandal back to their doorstep. But Amelia, she never truly let go. She watched from afar, struggling, always trying to find a way to be with Ethan. She battled with addiction, with mental health issues. She was in and out of trouble, always on the fringes. And then she came to you? I prompted, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. She knew she was dying, David explained, his eyes pleading for understanding. She found me. She couldn't go back to your parents. She was ashamed, broken. She knew we wanted children, but she heard we were struggling. She knew how much I valued family. She begged me, Sarah, begged me to take Ethan in, to give him a home, a name, to give him a father. A father, I whispered, the implication hitting me with the force of a physical blow. You mean you pretended to be his father, not his uncle, his father? She made me promise, David insisted, his voice cracking. She was dying, Sarah. She said she wanted Ethan to have a fresh start, without the shame of her past, without the scandal following him. She knew your parents would never accept him. She believed that if he was my child, born into our seemingly perfect family, he would have a chance at a normal life. She extracted that promise from me on her deathbed. She died 2 weeks after I took Ethan in. I slumped back in my chair, the weight of his confession crushing me. My parents, pillars of the community, had orchestrated a decades-long cover-up, sacrificed their own sister for their reputation, and abandoned their grandson. And David, my husband, had willingly stepped into the lie, perpetuating it, not for gain, but out of a misguided sense of duty and a tragic attempt at compassion. He thought he was honoring Amelia's last wish, giving a child a future. But in doing so, he had destroyed our present. The woman in the coffee shop, Olivia, I said, my voice flat. She's Ethan's nanny. Does she know all of this? Yes, David confirmed, his eyes meeting mine. She's known from the beginning. She was Amelia's best friend, her only friend really. in her final years. Olivia helped Amelia find me. She's been with Ethan since I took him in. She's his anchor. My anchor, too. She helped me keep this impossible secret. That day in the coffee shop, Sarah, we weren't having an affair. We were discussing Ethan's school, a problem he was having. And she was comforting me. The weight of it all. The lie. The fear of you finding out. It was crushing me. A strange wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't an affair of the flesh, but it was an affair of the soul. He had shared his deepest secret, his greatest burden, with another woman, while I, his wife, remained blissfully, ignorantly, alone. He had not betrayed me with passion, but with the quiet, sustained intimacy of a shared, monumental lie. I need to talk to my parents, I stated, pushing myself up. Now. David made a move to stop me. Sarah, please, be careful. They aren't strong enough for this. Strong enough? I scoffed, a raw, bitter laugh escaping me. They were strong enough to condemn their own sister, to abandon their own grandson. They'll be strong enough to face me. I called my parents from Clara's office, my voice devoid of the usual warmth. Mother, Father, I need to see you, immediately. It's about Amelia. And Ethan. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening, then a faint gasp from my mother. They knew. They had always known. They arrived at our house an hour later, their faces pale and drawn. My father, usually so stoic, looked like a defeated man. My mother, who prided herself on her composure, wrung her hands, her eyes darting nervously around the living room, avoiding my gaze. I sat across from them, David standing by the doorway, a silent, grim witness. Why? I began, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and grief. Why did you do it? Why did you hide Amelia? Why did you let her struggle alone? Why did you deny your own grandson? My mother finally looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. Sarah, honey, we did it for you, for our family, for your future. Amelia, she was always so wild, so reckless. Her choices threatened everything. The scandal, it would have ruined us. Ruined you. Your father's career, our standing in the community. We wanted you to have a perfect life, a clean slate. A clean slate built on lies, I cried, the carefully constructed calm shattering. You abandoned your own flesh and blood for appearances. You taught me that family was everything, that loyalty was paramount, but you betrayed your sister, your daughter, your grandson, all for the sake of reputation. And David picked up your pieces, your lies, and continued the charade. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. It was a different time, Sarah. We made mistakes. We thought we were protecting everyone. We thought we were doing the right thing for the family name. He looked at David. We never intended for David to get involved. We just assumed Amelia had moved on, found a new life. She died, Father, I shouted, tears streaming down my face. She died alone, broken, leaving her son to be raised in secret because you were too afraid of what people would say. And David, my husband, was left to carry this burden, this secret, for 6 years, lying to me every day because he believed he was honoring a dying wish and protecting your shame. The room was filled with the sound of my sobs and the heavy silence of their guilt. Their faces, once familiar bastions of comfort and authority, now seemed alien, etched with the devastating truth of their profound deception. My parents, the people I had revered, were not the flawless, principled individuals I had always believed them to be. They were flawed, afraid, and deeply complicit in a lie that had festered for decades. The ensuing weeks were a blur of emotional upheaval. The affidavit was filed. confirming every detail David had reluctantly confessed. The sealed records were unsealed, revealing the full, heartbreaking history of Amelia and Ethan. The court, with the judge's stern guidance, recognized the extraordinary circumstances surrounding David's actions. While his deception of me was undeniable, the motivation behind it, a desperate attempt to honor a dying woman's wish and provide for a neglected child, was also clearly established. It wasn't simple adultery, though the intimate connection with Olivia, born of shared secrecy and burden, was still a profound betrayal of our marital trust. The divorce proceeded, but the narrative had fundamentally shifted. Equitable division of assets now involved consideration for Ethan's future. David made it clear he would continue to support Ethan, openly and fully, as his nephew, finally shedding the pretense of being his father. He took full responsibility for the financial and emotional support, ensuring Ethan would be cared for. Olivia, Ethan's nanny, remained a constant, loving presence in Ethan's life. David and I would share custody of our two children, who, with age-appropriate explanations, were slowly processing the existence of their new cousin, Ethan, and the complex web of family secrets. It was a messy, painful transition for everyone. My relationship with my parents was irrevocably fractured. They expressed remorse, begged for forgiveness, but the trust was shattered beyond repair. I couldn't look at them without seeing the calculated cruelty of their choices, the decades of deceit. I understood the societal pressures of their generation, the desperate need to maintain appearances, but understanding did not equate to forgiveness. Not yet. Perhaps never in the way they wished. As for David, our marriage was over. The foundation of trust, once absolute, had been pulverized. I could never go back to him, knowing the depth of his capacity for secrets, even if born of a twisted sense of good. But the searing anger had begun to give way to a weary, profound sadness. He wasn't the monster I initially thought him to be, but a man caught in an impossible, self-made trap, sacrificing his marriage for a secret he felt honor-bound to keep. The affair with Olivia was an emotional one. Yes, a solace found in shared burden, but not a sexual one in the way I'd originally envisioned. That didn't make it hurt less, but it reshaped the narrative of betrayal. One quiet afternoon, months after the divorce was finalized, I visited Ethan. Not in the separate house David had rented, but in a small park near David's new apartment, where David had brought him for a playdate. I watched him from a distance, a vibrant, happy boy, his dark hair tousled, his blue eyes sparkling with innocent joy. He was kicking a football with David, laughing freely. He looked so much like Amelia, and so much like me. He was family, my family. I realized then that despite all the lies, all the pain, something unexpectedly beautiful had emerged from the wreckage. Ethan, an innocent child, deserving of love and a family, finally free from the shadows of secrecy. He was Amelia's legacy, and now he was undeniably part of my family, a cousin to my children, a tangible link to a past that had been deliberately erased. My journey had started with shattered trust, leading me down a path of betrayal and devastating revelations. But it had brought me to this moment, standing on the precipice of a new, albeit difficult, future. I was no longer the golden couple wife, blissfully unaware. I was Sarah, a woman who had faced the deepest lies, confronted the darkest corners of her family's past, and emerged, not unscathed, but whole. The truth, when it finally came, wasn't a neat, clean resolution. It was messy, painful, and forever altered my perception of those I loved. But it was truth. And in its brutal honesty, I found an unexpected sense of liberation. My life was no longer built on a meticulously crafted illusion. It was built on the unvarnished reality of human fallibility, of complex motivations, of profound love intertwined with profound mistakes. I was divorcing David, But I was also divorcing the naive version of myself who believed in perfect lives and unwavering narratives. I was embracing a future where love was complicated, family was imperfect, and trust had to be earned, constantly. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a quiet strength radiating from within. It was the strength of knowing, of understanding, and of choosing to rebuild on a foundation of reality, no matter how harsh. I took a deep breath, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs. The sun felt warm on my face. The world, though irrevocably changed, still held beauty. And in that moment, watching Ethan's joyful laughter, I understood that truth brings peace, not perfection. And sometimes, peace is enough.